In 1988, an entire class of students mysteriously disappeared, leaving the nation baffled and haunted by an unsolved enigma. For 36 long years, the incident remained shrouded in uncertainty until one day, an elderly woman stepped forward to reveal a chilling truth. Sophie, a 70-year-old former school teacher, arrived at the police station claiming to know the secret behind the disappearance that had gripped the country for decades. Her confession sent shockwaves through the room as the officers gathered to hear her tale. The case had become a haunting legend, a mystery no one could explain, but Sophie held the key to unlocking it. She began by recounting that fateful day in April 1988 when Mr. Dubois, a beloved and dedicated science teacher, led his students on a nature walk into a nearby forest. The excursion was part of a hands-on project to study local flora and fauna, a routine educational activity with no signs of danger. As the clock approached 3 p.m., the school bell rang in the distance, signaling the end of the school day. But neither Mr. Dubois or his students returned. In a moment of sheer disbelief, the school principal sounded the alarm. The police were called in, and soon, concerned parents, teachers, and even locals joined the search. They combed the forest for hours, but no trace of the students or their teacher could be found. It was as if they had vanished into thin air. What began as a routine school day had morphed into a nightmare. For years, the incident was chalked up to one of life's unexplainable mysteries, a tragic event that haunted the small town and left an indelible scar on the community. Speculations ranged from kidnappings to natural disasters, but no solid leads emerged. Over time, the case went cold, leaving behind only unanswered questions and a growing sense of dread. Then came Sophie's confession. She had worked as a young teacher at the same school during the time of the disappearance. Like many others, she had initially dismissed the rumors and stories surrounding the forest. Locals often spoke of eerie occurrences in the woods, tales of ghosts, strange lights, and unexplained sounds. But Sophie, being a rational person, had never put much stock in those stories. However, on that fateful day, everything changed. Sophie explained that she had been near the edge of the forest when she witnessed something she could never forget. She saw a strange shimmering light envelop the area where Mr. Dubois and his students had been standing. It wasn't just an ordinary light, it pulsed and shimmered, unlike anything she had seen before. Within moments, the entire group vanished before her eyes. 1 second they were there, and the next, they were gone without a trace. Shocked and terrified, Sophie kept what she saw a secret for years. She feared that no one would believe her, or worse, that she would be blamed for not intervening. As time went on and the mystery continued to haunt the town, Sophie wrestled with her conscience. She had witnessed something otherworldly, and though she tried to bury the memory, it never left her. In the decades that followed, the town's unsolved mystery grew darker, but Sophie's silence only deepened her sense of guilt. She had seen the impossible, and yet she had kept it hidden. Now, at 70 years old, she couldn't hold it in any longer. As she revealed this to the police, the room fell silent. The officers, a mix of skepticism and fascination, listened carefully as Sophie described the light, the eerie stillness, and the terrifying moment of disappearance. Some dismissed it as an overactive imagination, but others couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the story. Sophie went on to explain that many in the town had long believed the forest held secrets far darker than anyone dared to admit. Some whispered about ancient curses, while others spoke of portals to other dimensions, but what if it wasn't just folklore? Sophie's account hinted at something far more chilling, the possibility that the forest was a gateway to another realm, a place where time and reality didn't behave as they should. The police, now faced with this new information, realized they had no choice but to reopen the cold case. With this strange, otherworldly element now in play, the disappearance of Mr. Dubois and his students took on a more disturbing tone. Could there really be a hidden force within the forest, or was this simply the wild imagination of a woman desperate to find closure? The case, once thought to be an unsolvable mystery, was now infused with renewed hope or dread, depending on who you asked. The authorities were left grappling with more questions than answers. What had really happened in the forest that day? And if there was a sinister force at play, would they ever truly uncover the truth? As Sophie finished her story, the officers exchanged uneasy glances. The chilling mystery, long considered a tragedy frozen in time, now seemed closer to being solved, or perhaps it was only the beginning of an even darker truth. As the officers absorbed Sophie's revelation, tension filled the room. There were no more words, only the weight of the silence that followed her chilling tale. A few officers exchanged uncertain glances, while others stared at Sophie, trying to gauge whether they were hearing the ramblings of an old woman or the first breakthrough in an unsolved mystery that had tormented the town for decades. The lead investigator, Detective Morrow, broke the silence. He had been a young officer when the students had vanished in 1988, and this case had always haunted him. "Sophie," he began, his voice measured but tense, "are you certain of what you saw that day?" Sophie's hands trembled slightly as she clasped them on the table. Her eyes, glassy with the weight of the memories she had carried for so long, met Detective Morrow's. "I've spent 36 years doubting my own sanity, but I know what I saw. That light, it wasn't natural. It was as if reality itself folded around them. One moment they were there, and then they weren't. It's haunted me every day since." The detective leaned back in his chair, exhaling deeply. The other officers remained quiet, waiting for Morrow to decide how to proceed. He could feel the enormity of what Sophie was suggesting. If what she said was true, this wasn't just a simple missing persons case, it was something far more terrifying. But where did they even begin? It wasn't as if they could launch an investigation into a supernatural phenomenon. And yet, Sophie's description of the shimmering light gnawed at his rational mind. Morrow thought back to the original investigation. The search parties had scoured every inch of the forest for days, calling out for Mr. Dubois and his students. Dogs were brought in, helicopters flew overhead, but no one found anything. No signs of struggle, no clues, just eerie, unsettling silence. It was as if the earth had swallowed them whole. Could it have been this strange light Sophie described, something unnatural? "We need to investigate the forest again," Morrow finally said, his tone resolute. "Something happened there, and it's been hiding in plain sight for far too long." The officers were hesitant. "But, sir," one of them, Officer Leclerc, began, "how can we search for something like this? What if it's just—" He stopped himself short, unsure of how to phrase it without sounding dismissive of Sophie's account. Morrow turned to Sophie. "You said the light seemed to envelop them. Was there anything else unusual about the forest that day? Any strange sounds, changes in the weather?" Sophie nodded slowly, as if remembering new details. "Yes," she said quietly. "There was a silence, an unnatural stillness, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. I remember that now. The birds had stopped singing. The wind died down. Everything felt suspended, and then, just before the light appeared, there was this strange vibration in the air, like a hum you could feel more than hear." Detective Morrow stood, his mind racing. "We'll need to check the old investigation files, revisit the forest, and see if anyone else might have noticed something strange back then, no matter how small. We also need to talk to the locals, the ones who mentioned the forest being haunted. Maybe they know more than they've let on." Sophie's eyes widened. "You can't go in there unprepared," she warned. "If there's something in that forest, something capable of making an entire class of students disappear, it could still be there. We don't know what we're dealing with." Morrow nodded grimly. "I'll put together a team. We'll tread carefully, but we need answers. If what you're saying is true, Sophie, then we've been looking at this case the wrong way for years. It's time to find out what really happened in those woods." As the meeting adjourned, Sophie watched the officers prepare to reopen the case. The forest had taken 36 years of her life, and she feared what might happen next. Would they find the truth, or would they uncover something even more terrifying, something that had been lying dormant all these years? The next day, Morrow and his team arrived at the forest, equipped with modern technology, thermal imaging cameras, electromagnetic sensors, and drones to survey the area from above. The air was thick, people with anticipation, each step into the woods accompanied by the feeling of stepping into something unknown and perhaps dangerous. The trees loomed tall and silent, their branches forming a canopy that blocked out much of the daylight. The deeper they ventured, the more oppressive the atmosphere became, just as Sophie had described. There was no bird song, no rustling of leaves, only the unsettling quiet. Morrow motioned to his team to stop. "This is where Sophie said she saw the light," he whispered. The officers exchanged uneasy glances as they set up their equipment. The sensors showed no immediate anomalies, but as they ventured deeper into the area where Mr. Dubois and the students had been last seen, strange readings began to spike. "Detective," called one of the technicians, her voice edged with concern, "we're picking up an electromagnetic field here, and it's not normal. It's fluctuating wildly." Suddenly, a low hum filled the air. The officers froze. It was just as Sophie had described, a vibration that seemed to pulse through the ground and the air around them. The forest seemed to close in on them, and then, out of the corner of Morrow's eye, he saw it, a shimmering light. It was faint at first, almost imperceptible, but it grew stronger, dancing between the trees like a living thing. "What is that?" one of the officers whispered, fear creeping into his voice. Before anyone could respond, the light swelled, enveloping the area in an eerie glow. The ground beneath them seemed to shift, and time itself felt like it was warping. Morrow's heart raced as the air grew thick with an unnatural energy. This was it. The same force that had taken Mr. Dubois and his students 36 years ago was still here. "Everyone, back away," Morrow shouted, but his voice was drowned out by the hum, now a deafening roar. The light grew brighter, more intense, until everything around them disappeared into the blinding glow. And then, just as suddenly as it began, it was over. The light vanished, the hum stopped, and the forest returned to its unnatural silence. Morrow blinked, his vision slowly adjusting to the dim light of the woods. But something was wrong. Half of his team was gone.